Considering the medium has been popular since the late 70s, it's not surprising there are now more video games out there than anyone can count. Most of the ones that stand the test of time do so because they're fantastic or have changed how games are made for years to come. Some, though, stick in our minds not because they are incredible, but because they are incredibly odd. This could be down to a strange story, presentation, something that's lost in translation, or maybe all of the above. But oftentimes, some of the most memorable gaming experiences are those where a developer has taken a chance with some idea that truly has no equal. Whether or not the following experiments worked or not, or whether they managed to gain a cult following over the years, there's no question that by most anyone's standards, they are definitely out of the norm. Be prepared for some truly bizarre sights as we delve into some of the most peculiar titles the video game world has to offer. I'm Peter from TripleJump, and here are 10 weird games guaranteed to haunt your dreams. Number 10. Gabal Screen. I think it's fair to say that, certainly from a Western perspective, there are a lot of weird games that come out of Japan. We're starting off our list with one such title, and you can be sure it won't be the only one. In Gabal Screen, players are first introduced to the host of the game, famous music producer Tetsuya Komuro, who then seemingly abandons the room. Then, without so much as an explanation, players take over a flying shoe and have to maneuver it through the differently themed worlds, which include a classroom, a racetrack, and a void full of giant babies. As they do this, they have to talk to the different inhabitants. I'm not really sure how that works, but presumably it involves the shoe's tongue. And interact with objects in order to collect CDs, which are then available to listen to and enjoy in the home. These aren't just tracks though, as each one has its own unique and often baffling live-action music video, which do nothing to help explain what's going on, but are at least catchy. In the end, Gabal Screen is probably more a marketing stunt for Antino's Records than an actual game, but that doesn't make it any less bizarre. Number 9. Time Warp Tickers. Now, admittedly, this one is a bit of a wild card entry, oh boy! Because if we want to get technical, Time Warp Tickers is actually a mini-game that can be found on an unlicensed NES multi-cart known as Action 52, which is notorious for housing some of the worst games ever made amongst its roster of, wouldn't you know it, 52 offerings. However, it is still a game that exists in some capacity, so no matter how questionable it is, we're going to have to count it. This short and not-so-sweet experience is one of the platformer persuasion, consisting of only 2 stages that feature enemies such as worms, CDs, and sentient shapes, which can be taken care of by flicking them. Flicking is certainly the word for it too, as the main reason this particular game is strange is because the playable character, as it were, resembles a pair of disembodied fingers. However, that alone isn't what makes it so upsetting. No, that would be the way they move. Maybe it would be better if it was a full hand-like thing, but something about the way these digits undulate as they make their way across the checkerboard floor makes us feel very uncomfortable. The game's quality may be bad, but somehow that movement is even worse. Number 8. Zombie Nation. Unfortunately, that's not the only disturbing protagonist that games have in store for us today, nor is it even the only one that happens to just be a body part. The tale of Zombie Nation is a classic one. A meteor that actually turns out to be an evil alien has crash-landed on Earth and turned the people of the US into zombies, and also brought the Statue of Liberty to life with the help of magnetism. Alright, in the Japanese version of the game, the playable character, if you can call it that, is a flying Tengu mask, which is a bit strange, but not necessarily all that upsetting. When it made its way to North America, though, the game went through many different changes, one of which saw the aforementioned mask change into a decapitated samurai head. As if that weren't strange enough, the main way to fight against the hordes of zombies and monsters that the game has to offer is to use the head's projectile attacks, which means firing both eyeballs and sick all over the enemies and unsuspecting zombified townsfolk, who are probably going to be less than grateful once their transformation is reversed. Talk about keeping your head in the game. Haha. No, don't like that one? Alright, calm down. Don't lose your heads. Oh, a double. Number 7. Pathologic. Bizarre cult classic survival RPG Pathologic takes place in a town that's suffering from something known as the Sand Plague. And in order to hopefully help assist the town and learn its secrets, players choose a healer and have to survive 12 days in this horrible place, whilst also being sure to take on NPCs' quests before they succumb to the illness and disappear. Sounds relatively straightforward really, if a bit stressful, but the whole vibe of the game is slightly off. Whether it's down to the translation, the voice acting, or just the oppressive atmosphere that's exacerbated by the depressing grey-brown aesthetic of the whole thing, playing through the story is quite a harrowing experience, with weird NPCs and interactions that make everything feel that little bit more wrong. It's perhaps not surprising that the streets in this plague-ridden town are mostly abandoned, but the ominous music and background noise make for a truly spooky experience while wandering amongst the intimidating buildings. Add to that the fact that the locations in this unsettling town are named after body parts and biological terms, plus the fact there's a seemingly impossible fortress run by children and an abattoir with a dormitory, and it's clear that something disturbing is almost certainly going on behind the scenes. Number 6. The Void. If you happen to be a fan of Pathologic's uncomfortable atmosphere, then you're in luck, because our next entry also happens to hail from the same Russia-based studio, Ice Pick Lodge. For our money though, we think their second game, The Void, is less creepy overall, but somehow even weirder. The eponymous Void is a sort of purgatory where the most valuable resource is colour, thanks to its scarcity and the fact that it represents the life force of everything in the world. The inhabitants of this realm, two competing factions known as the Sisters and the Brothers, are threatened by famine, and it's up to the protagonist to pose as a member of the Brothers and confront them whilst trying to escape the Void. Depending on the player's actions, the Brothers will either be sympathetic towards the player, or may just outright attack them. But as this is a strange realm, it's not as simple as knocking on the door and having a chat with your normal human neighbour. The true horror comes in when confronting each member of this faction, as all of them are mechanical in some way and are often quite horrifically merged with weapons and surgically modified, essentially having become part tank and part science experiment. Personally, looking at what might happen to me, I think I'd quite like to avoid the Void. Number 5. Cruelty Squad. Games can be weird in a lot of ways, but it's very rare they happen to be weird in just about every possible way. Rare, but not unheard of, as this next title proves. Described as an immersive power fantasy with tactical stealth elements, Cruelty Squad is a true assault on the senses, with an aesthetic that looks like someone ate every flavour available at an ice cream shop and then immediately sicked it back up. In addition to that, the music is weird and dissonant and sounds as though it's being piped in from underwater. While this is quite a lot to process right off the bat in and of itself, it doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of the weirdness on offer, because that genre description I gave earlier really buries the lead. At its core, Cruelty Squad is technically a tactical FPS, with the biologically augmented assassin protagonist performing a variety of black ops for their employer, while at the same time being a satire of gig economies, set in a dystopian world where corporations have massive control over government affairs. That's right, the most unnerving thing about this title isn't the damage it can cause your retinas, it's how disturbingly realistic that quote-unquote dystopian premise actually is. Now that is true horror. Number 4. The Annika series. For the most part, weird games are one-off affairs, a chance to try something new and experimental and give players an experience unlike any other. Whether or not these end up paying off, they generally don't stick around, and certainly don't tend to spawn sequels. One exception to this, though, is the Annika series, which has at least 7 mainline games, with each new installment seemingly trying to outdo the last with how utterly insane it can get. In fact, this entire franchise falls into the classification of what's known in Japan as bakage, literally translating to stupid game, where the whole point is to be as ridiculous as possible. Now that we mention it, that explains a lot. Anyway, each of these titles takes the form of a side-scrolling shooter with a variety of pun-named antagonists battling against one of the 2 available bodybuilder player characters. This alone wouldn't be enough to earn the series the reputation it has, however, and it's the enemy designs where the creativity of the games really shine, if you can call it that. Most of the ridiculous sprites are either objectionable or suggestive, or some unholy combination of the 2. Good luck explaining this one to Grandma, is all I'm saying. Number 3. Oikospiel Book 1. Modern art and avant-garde expression are not for everyone, but they do have their place in the world and can inspire some interesting conversations. That said, in order to do so, players have to understand what it is they're looking at in the first place, at least to some degree, which is something that our next game has failed to realise. Coined a dog opera, as if that's supposed to help it make any sort of sense, Oikospiel Book 1 is absurdism at its questionable finest, constantly switching the scene and seemingly making things up as it goes along. So much so that no mere human could ever hope to make sense of it, or possibly even enjoy it. Theoretically, this bizarre experimental adventure game will take players through a variety of, quote, fevered landscapes, God, talk about the understatement of the millennium, and constantly switches things up, changing mood, atmosphere, colour palette, and even protagonist as the action progresses through the indecipherable world. Between the psychedelic environments and the absolutely inscrutable mind flip of a plot, this is definitely one that, like it or not, you'll find yourself thinking about for a long time after you stop playing. Number 2. Seaman. Seaman is probably one of the most well-known weird video games out there, and it fully deserves that reputation. The title alone was likely to give certain gamers a giggle before they even knew what it had in store for them, but soon after popping the game into their Dreamcast, the chuckles likely shifted from those of amusement to those of nervousness and discomfort instead. By far the strangest virtual pet game ever conceived, players have to take care of the titular creature, which is part human, part frog, and all nightmare fuel. There's very little in the way of gameplay here, really, as the evolutionary anomaly simply needs to be checked every actual human day and then cared for to ensure it lives to see its final form, the strange frog-human hybrid found on the game's case, which is when it can finally be released from its long captivity. Apparently, the human face wasn't enough freakiness on its own, though, as Seaman is one of the few games that made use of the Dreamcast's microphone, meaning not only do you have to deal with looking at that horrible creature in the first place, but also feel inferior as it spouts insults and existential nonsense at you.
Fire is a wonderful thing, but I wouldn't want to sit on a sofa made out of it.
God, and here's me thinking pet tarantulas were a bit much. And number 1, Paranoiascape. We've had a lot of incredibly concerning imagery over the course of this list, but somehow we're not quite done yet. If you made it this far without having your sleep schedule ruined, I can promise you that's all about to go out of the window. The The absolute mess of a game that is Paranoiascape, or Screaming Mad George's Paranoiascape if you want to get even more bizarre title about this, is actually a pinball game, though you'd be forgiven for not realising it between the many things happening on screen at any given time, and the fact that it's weirdly played in first person, with the flippers seemingly taking the place of the character's arms. Each of the levels is disturbingly biological, featuring mouths, eyes, ears, and organs that are often pulsating in concerning ways, as well as strange and surreal enemies which have to be batted away with the use of the pinball flippers. The soundscape doesn't help either, as it's full of bizarre music and enemy screams. This is, in the game's lore, what hell looks like. And you know what? I can't disagree with that, because I honestly can't imagine anything more horrible looking than this.